Hey there, Duke fans. Welcome to episode number 82 of the DBR podcast. I am hosting for you this week. I am Jason Evans. By the way, I just want to give you 5 words to remember. We'll come back to these in the middle of the podcast. Got to be a hero. Remember those words. Got to be a hero. I will tell you what they mean a little later on. But before I explain that to you, we have to talk a little bit about some football, a little bit about some basketball. And to do that, I'm joined by my 2 partners in crime in Washington, D.C., Donald Wine.
Hey, what's going on, fellas?
Not much at all, except for we have a pretty good football team that we've got here. And out in Colorado, Sam Klein. How you doing, Sam?
My Washington Nationals clinched the National League East on Sunday, and I am very happy about that, even though they play in a trash division.
Hey, my Atlanta Braves are part of that trash division.
That they are.
I will see both your teams play tomorrow here in DC.
Ooh, very exciting.
I like it. Very nice. Very nice.
Huge stakes in that game.
The battle for whatever place.
That's right.
Battle for a place that does not matter, but places that do matter is where the Duke football team is going. They are now 2-0 after whooping, and I mean whooping, Northwestern 41-17. And it's not often you get to say this on a 41-17 game. It wasn't as close as the score indicates. Duke outgained Northwestern 538 yards to 191. Which basically means the Duke offense did whatever it wanted and the Duke defense did whatever it wanted. Duke QB Daniel Jones rushed for 100-plus yards, threw for 300-plus yards. That is only the second time in history, and that's only the second time in Duke's history that they've had a QB throw for 300, and run for 100. TJ Rahming had 12 catches. The defense was spectacular: 4 sacks, 2 interceptions. I'm saying too much because I'm hosting, so you guys are the ones in charge of saying stuff. So I'm going to go first to Donald. Donald, I want you to talk mostly about the offense for me. What did you see? What thrilled you? How did Duke get 41 points with ease against a legit BCS opponent in Northwestern?
Well, you alluded to it. I mean, the first thing is to score, you have to, advance the ball. And we did that basically at will. A couple of stats that you didn't point out. You pointed out the 538 total yards. We had 34 first downs, which is a remarkable number for any game against any opponent. 34 first downs is a lot. 15 of 22 on third down conversions, which means even if we were getting to, third and long, third and short, we were converting. We had 41 minutes possession, and the 2 turnovers that we had in the game was the interception on the first possession of the game and then a fumble late in the first half that really didn't, help. I mean, it didn't really affect the game when you look at it as a whole. One thing that I wanted to point out on offense before we get to some of the other stats, after Northwestern kind of had a little bit of momentum in the first quarter. They, as I mentioned, they had the interception on the first possession of the game for us. We also took the ball after they got a field goal, drove the ball the length of the field, and they intercepted the ball again. But they also had a targeting penalty on that play, and after that targeting penalty, that's where I think the momentum shifted and Duke took off from there. It was great to see Duke punching into the end zone. Daniel Jones had a really good run to score the touchdown on that possession. And then after that, it almost felt like the team could do anything they wanted. Daniel Jones had 108 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns. He ran the ball very hard and extremely well. Sean Wilson had 14 carries for 58 yards. So, the rushing yards, they had 233 rushing yards, which is more rushing yards than Northwestern had total yards. So that's a really good sign when you have your rushing game really going well. That fuels everything else. Daniel Jones was zipping the ball. I thought he was making great throws. He was making great decisions with the ball for the most part, including that beauty of a bomb to Chris Taylor in the second quarter for that long touchdown. That's a play when you see a guy that wide open, that play was executed to perfection. And everyone on that play did their job. So that was really good to see. We saw a lot of that, especially on third down when we needed a play to be made. The plays were made and they're very calm, executing everything with poise, and showed excellent leadership. I thought a lot of the guys on the team showed excellent leadership. Daniel Jones spread the ball around too. He had 10 guys making a catch in the game. I'm even counting Sean Wilson because I guess Sean Wilson's technically was for a loss, but to spread the ball around, to have that many guys be involved in the offense is a really good thing to have. And you can see everyone kind of working together, leading the team down the field. If one person's on the field, the other guys are cheering them on. Would they have to step up off the bench? Those guys were making great plays too. So credit to the offense, credit to the coaching staff for making great plays and executing them at will, and really making Northwestern look like a team that should not have been on the field with Duke. That is a very tall task to do that against a Power 5 opponent. To do that against Northwestern was a really good sign. Stretching the defense and taking advantage of the momentum. They literally just grabbed it. There was, and I'm alluding to the defense. Defense, there's times where the offense would make plays, and sometimes the defense would take the play and literally just rip the ball away from Northwestern and run with it. So with that, I'll turn it to Sam. Sam, what did you see on defense? Because from my vantage point, I thought the defense had a hell of an afternoon.
Yeah, it was really nice. I did want to add, kind of before I dive into the defense, a couple notes on the offense. I did see over the weekend, I think SB Nation's Bill Connolly, he puts out a lot of stats, and Adam Rowe over at the Devil's Den noted that I think it was Adam Rowe noted that Duke was the only of the BCS teams this weekend, or whatever we call the top level of competition in college football, was the only one of those teams that ran 100 plays over this weekend, which was pretty cool. So the offense was great. They stayed on the field. They moved the ball really well, as Donald said. I think the other interesting thing to look at as far as kind of the big picture on the offense is that Coach Cutcliffe really seems to trust Daniel Jones, and in not kind of the game manager way that he trusted Thomas Sirk. I think that Jones is given a lot more leeway to decide who to throw to. He makes a lot more checks, and he throws the ball to a lot of different receivers, and he is smart about when to run. It's one thing to have a mobile quarterback. It's another thing to be that mobile quarterback and know the moment when the play is breaking down and you have that window to be able to run. I really like watching Jones's decision making because he can really extend plays, and he also doesn't get to a point like 3 or 4 seconds into the play where he has made 2 checks and decides to run. He looks at every guy and maintains the ability to throw deep into plays. And that might be a commentary on Northwestern's defense, but I'm really enjoying that progression from him. And I think that maybe it didn't shock Northwestern's coaching staff so much, but I would bet that sort of the average Northwestern fan who's watching this game probably was surprised at how much Jones has progressed from early last year when he was recently installed as the starter to early this year. He looks really mature on offense. Now,
okay, so Sam,
yeah.
So we said that Donald was going to talk about the offense. You were going to talk about the defense.
All right.
And dude, the defense was the player of the game.
So let me tell you about the defense then. I'm gonna move to the defense. I just feel like I needed to give Daniel Jones a little bit more juice. The defense was amazing. The defense there were 2 stretches that I would like to highlight. In the second quarter, the Duke defense forced a number of the first quarter ended with Northwestern punting. Duke scored a touchdown, Northwestern fumbled. Duke scored another touchdown, Northwestern punted on a 3-and-out, and Clayton Thorson, the last useful play of that drive was Clayton Thorson, the quarterback for Northwestern, getting sacked by defensive tackle Mike Ramsey, who had a heck of a game, was disrupting everything. Another punt. Duke punted. There was kind of a back and forth. Northwestern actually scored another touchdown in the second quarter, but I thought that the whole sequence, like for the first the first like 10 minutes or so of that second quarter, was really essential for Duke because they scored a couple times and had a couple of really quick Northwestern drives, forced the Northwestern defense back on the field, who clearly were starting to look tired even as early as midway through the second quarter. Looking into the second half, where it kind of turned into a blowout, Northwestern only had 1 drive where they ran more than 5 plays in the second half, and that was the last drive when all the backups were in and their backup quarterback was in. And they did score a touchdown late, and as Jason said, the final score was probably not as close as the game would have indicated. I wanted to highlight a couple other guys on the defense. So I mentioned Mike Ramsey, our defensive tackle, who was really spectacular up front. in the linebacker core, both Ben Humphreys and Joe Giles Harris had excellent games. A couple tackles for loss, and made a lot of big stops around the line of scrimmage. It seemed like every time Northwestern was maybe about to break off a big play, one of those guys kind of appeared and stopped it. And the defense was gang tackling around those guys really well. 2 interceptions by Mark Gilbert, which were really fantastic. Kind of out of nowhere. He wasn't much of a factor for the defense last year. And then the other defensive
wait. The 2 interceptions by Gilbert, I swear on both those plays, Gilbert was the targeted guy. Like literally the pass went directly to him both times. It was hysterical.
Yeah, totally him making those plays. And he had the one, I think the first one he had where he kind of cut under the receiver and returned it. That was outstanding. And you're right, Jason. It did seem like he was in the best position to catch those balls. So really well done by him. And then the other defensive back I thought who had a great day was Alonzo Saxton, who had led the team in sacks from the safety position, or not in sacks, in tackles rather, from the safety position. Was kind of all over the place, breaking up plays. We talked about in the preview how
and by the way, Saxton had the strip. He was the guy who ripped the ball away and had the strip fumble recovery. Which strip fumble recovery. I mean, it goes as a fumble. It's a fumble recovery, but it wasn't a fumble by any stretch of the imagination. It was Saxton said, "I want that ball. I'm taking it away from you."
Yeah, and did it like a man, I would say.
He literally took the ball and handed it, and like he went to the ground and got up, and the ref like kind of blew the ball dead as if to say, "Okay, it's a first down," and then Saxton got up and was just like, "This ball is yours now. I don't need it," and like ran off the field.
The when we talked in the preview about Northwestern's offense, which last year really was pretty good, we highlighted specifically their quarterback Clayton Thorson, who is a big guy. He's not especially mobile, but he makes a lot of good throws. Duke held him to 11 for 29 passing, only threw for 120 yards on the day. And then we also talked about Justin Jackson, their star running back. He rushed 7 times for 18 yards. So not the best day for Northwestern's star offensive players. In total,
Northwestern,
the Wildcats.
I was going to say they only average 1 yard per carry. 1 yard per carry. We crushed them. Our line and our linebackers won that game.
And that's when I say that it seemed like every play they were making stops at the line of scrimmage, and there you go. That's the stat to back it up. If you remove Thorson's, I'm looking at the ESPN version of the stats. If you remove Thorson's rushes, which accounted for negative 40 yards, I assume those are all the sacks. Northwestern only rushed for 62 yards, and did give the ball to a lot of different guys. So it's not like they were trying one game plan. Like I said, Jackson only got 7 carries. So Northwestern was trying a lot of different things, and Duke just stopped them every time. I think that the most important stat, and the one that I think football commentators like to harp on, is that Northwestern was only 1 for 10 on third down for the day. And it seemed like, I talked about Ramsey and Giles Harris and Humphreys. It seemed like every time there was a key third down and Northwestern had a few opportunities, those guys were right there to stop the play. And like Jason said, it wasn't as close as it seemed because they got that touchdown late. Northwestern couldn't really get much of anything going on offense. And honestly, the thing that probably kept them in the game a little more was that their punting was so good. They kept having bad field position to start drives.
Oh my God, their punter
having
was
3
awesome.
and outs. And then they kept punting to within inside the 20-yard line to the other side of the field. So it seemed like every Duke drive they were going to have to march 80 yards to get a touchdown. And to the offense's credit, they did that. But if Northwestern didn't have such a good punter, and if Duke's punting honestly wasn't so great, because Duke's punting was not the strength on the day, this could have been an even more lopsided affair. And on the subject of special teams, I would just finally note that Austin Parker did have a great day with his field goals and his extra points. didn't miss any of them, so that was really great, especially given the up and down season,
Oh,
mostly down season that he had last year.
dude, you stole my. I was going to say there was no drama points, and wasn't that nice to see?
It was really nice.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. By the way, Cutcliffe says that Austin Parker is capable of kicking 50-plus yard field goals, but Cutcliffe hates taking long field goals. He doesn't like attempting them. So that's why we, don't take a lot of long ones. But he says that Parker's got plenty of foot for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you a lot about what I saw in football practice when I was with the team, but a lot of guys can do that. The matter of whether or not they can do it in a game is entirely different. So I will believe that. I will believe that when I see it. But there are plenty of dudes who are on. Assuming that the kicking talent has not changed dramatically since 2011, there are plenty of guys on the bench who can kick 40 and 50-yard field goals. They just can't necessarily do it under pressure. And we've even seen, going back to my time, how volatile the kicking game can be. Because one year Will Snyderwine was like an All-American kicker, and the next year he was missing 25 and 30 yarders regularly. So it's a challenge. I think the point of what Cutcliffe was saying about not wanting to take 50 yarders is that you're only getting 3 points. The offense is pretty good as it is, and you don't want to give up that bad field position to the other team, because if you miss that 50-yarder, then all of a sudden, the opponent gets the ball at the 35 or 40-yard line, as opposed to pushing them back. And on kickoffs, Duke was excellent at stuffing runs. I can't believe that Northwestern kept running the ball out of the end zone, because Duke kept ending their run backs at the 15 or 20-yard line.
I mean, there was a lot that even were, it was weird because you could see the ball, we were deliberately kicking the ball straight up in the air so that it would land right at 1 yard into the end zone. Yeah. And it was just almost like a trap, and Northwestern fell for it every single kickoff.
And there was one return
at the 10-yard line.
There was one return, I think it was in the second half, where we kicked it right where you were just describing, and the returner kind of took a step and then was like, you could see the wheels turning in his head, where he was like, crap, I'm about to get hit at the 12.
And he got wrecked
about going back. And his teammate was like, nope, got to run. Let's go. You got to take this. You've already taken it too far. So I would say that the one thing that was really unlucky for Northwestern was that targeting call in the first half that I think very much changed the momentum of the game. Northwestern's it was one of their defensive backs, Jake McGee, who was called for targeting. Duke was driving, was close to the end zone. McGee hit one of our receivers, and then another one of the Northwestern defensive players got an interception on the play. They called it back for targeting. McGee was dismissed from the game per the rules, and Northwestern's coach Pat Fitzgerald said afterwards that he was fine with the call. He understands the rules and he supports that and player safety, etc. But that really turned the tide for Duke and gave them the juice kind of to finish off that drive.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that the interception had nothing to do with the targeting. I didn't think.
No, it didn't.
Yeah, no.
But
it wasn't one of these cases. Sometimes there's a case where a team gets a turnover, they get an interception or something, and it gets called back for penalty, and you're like, yeah, they, like there's a holding or something like that. And
it bounced off his the dude's hands. He turned and then got hit. It wasn't like he had the ball in his hands and he got popped, and that's why the ball flew in the air. It was basically tipped off his hands.
Yeah, it was a light helmet to helmet as far as targeting calls go. Yeah. I think Duke got a little bit lucky on that.
It was a bang bang play. It was the letter of the law. Yes, it's almost unfortunate. You know what I'm saying? That was a good tackle. It's just that he did it in the wrong time. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
hit him with the crown. So
yeah. Exactly. Although it's worth noting, later on in the first, I think it was in the first half, maybe in the third quarter, I forget. Duke had a big play called back for penalty when TJ Rahming had a huge punt return. Mm-hmm. In fact, I thought it was in the first half. I thought he got injured.
He got popped.
Yeah, but the play got called back because because of an illegal block on a Duke guy, and it was an illegal block that really didn't have much to do with springing Rahming so he could get this big return. So to some extent, each team had a huge momentum shifting kind of play that was called back for penalty. So it balanced out, I thought, at least a little bit. Guys, I want to quickly point out to you what I thought. Sam, I think you're right. That play, the targeting penalty that negated the interception, was really big. I mean, there's no question that was a major turning point. There was another one that I identified while I was watching the game. When Duke was leading 14-3, so it was still very much a competitive contest. And Saxton had the strip fumble recovery. Duke had the ball in Northwestern's territory, but we were only at the 37. We're not. That's not field goal range for Duke. And we had a 3rd down and 8. And I made a little note to myself, and I said, this is a really big play because we just gotten the strip, we just gotten the turnover. And we're in their territory, and it's 14-3. And you figure if we can get a touchdown here, or at least even a field goal here, put ourselves up 2 touchdowns or more, it changes the whole complexion. And it's about 10 minutes, 11 minutes left in the second quarter when this happened. And I was like, we need to convert this 3rd and 8, and we did. Daniel Jones passed Jonathan Lloyd for 12 yards. We converted, and then a few plays later, we scored our touchdown to make it 21-3, and the route was on. But I thought it was such a huge play, a huge moment. I wanted to point that one moment out, that 3rd and 8 that Jones completed that pass. I thought it was just a really, really big time. A couple other little things, because you guys covered so much. I just wanted to mention really quickly. Now playing the role of Brandon Connett, Quentin Harris. Did you guys know? I thought Quentin Harris did a nice job of running really hard when he came in as the running quarterback, as sort of the wildcat quarterback position.
So I want to quibble a little bit with that, because I think that, and for a little bit of extra background, right? A few years ago, during Duke's best season, the 2013 year, Brandon Connett was like, he wasn't even really the backup quarterback. He was just the wildcat.
He was a runner.
Quarterback.
Yeah, he was a runner.
And he did that very well. But he just came in for those plays. And I think that on the one hand, I liked that back in those days that Duke was able to kind of change up the package, and that opposing teams sort of had the game plan for multiple quarterbacks. But when you looked at it like the total playbook, it wasn't like the Connett package was all that diverse. It was basically just, oh, well, here comes Connett. He's going to run the ball up the middle really hard. And so I liked it because it was diverse. On the other hand, I don't know that it really confused defenses all that much. I like now, and I'm fine with Harris doing it. And if Cutcliffe likes it, that's fine. I like that we don't rely on it as much now as we did then. I think it shows a bit of an evolution for the team, and it also shows how much more Cutcliffe trusts Daniel Jones, because it wasn't even like he used it on every possession in the red zone the way that we used to do with Connett. Jones can make those runs himself, and he can also, like I was saying before, turn those plays into passes because he's always keeping his eyes downfield. So I like that we still have it. I like that it adds a wrinkle. I also like that we're trying to evolve away from it. Because it shows a little bit, I think, of more maturity in the offensive play calling.
Well, I think it is worth noting, now that you've said that, the report we got on the DBR is that Cutcliffe really praised how hard Quentin Harris has been working in practice. And Cut says he wants to find more ways to get Quentin Harris into games, to get the ball in his hands. I think you're right. I think he's going to be more than just it's just strictly a runner, the way Connett was that one season. I think Connett had like 18 touchdowns that year, or something silly. That.
Well, because we put him in on every play, like within like the 8 or 10 yard line.
If we were inside the 10, he was taking it and he was scoring. But exactly. I think, folks, as good as Daniel Jones looks, and I mean, look, there are people who are talking NFL for Daniel Jones, because he's got the right size, he's got the right build. He had really impressive accuracy this week. So there are people who are saying, oh, does Daniel Jones maybe has a pro career ahead of him as a quarterback? It's clear that from what we're hearing, that Cut really wants Quentin Harris to get more and more chances. So, and I think that's great. I think it's really good for Duke. If nothing else, it makes us feel comfortable about having a backup quarterback. And that leads me to one last thing I wanted to mention that bothered me a little bit. I mean, look, I don't want to be the guy questioning Coach Cutcliffe, because the dude is clearly a genius and he has done incredible things with the Duke program. But we were leading by 28 points left in the game. And Daniel Jones, Sean Wilson, and TJ Rahming, who are our three best offensive players, our three offensive stars, were still in the game. We're still taking hits. And I was a little bit like, hey, Cut, we're up by 28. And there's only 5 minutes left. How about you take your quarterback? I think there was a designed run at one point in there, quarterback run on one of the plays with about 5-6 minutes left. And I was like, really? We're going to let Daniel Jones get hit one more time, leading by 28? So I kind of wish, let's let other guys get some chances in a game that was clearly decided. And that's it. That's what we got on Northwestern. It was a great game, a lot of fun, and we're about to move on to a preview of Baylor. But before we do that, I want to take a moment and I want to talk about a guy named Paul Dufault. And you would know him better as Ultra Runner on the DBR. That's his. Folks who read the DBR a lot, you'll know who Ultra Runner is. Well, his name in real life is Paul Dufault. And remember, guys, at the very beginning of the podcast, I said, remember these words: "Got to be a hero." Well, I'm about to tell you why. So, folks, you remember we said last time on the podcast that we're taking sponsors, and there's time and effort and monetary expense that goes into us putting these podcasts together. And so we're going to try and recoup a little bit of that. Well, Paul stepped up almost immediately and he said, I want to sponsor one of the podcasts. And so he's sponsoring this podcast. And Paul, we cannot thank you enough. He's just a really great guy. He said he's doing it out of the goodness of his heart and because he values our contributions to the Duke community. And this was sort of funny. He said to me that he doesn't really get a chance to listen to the podcast very much because a lot of people listen in their cars. But he uses his time in his car to come up with ideas for books. And when he said that to me, I went, wait a second, you're an author? He said, yeah. And I said, I know how we're going to honor your sponsorship, Paul. So here is how we're honoring his sponsorship. Paul is an author, and his latest book, available on Amazon, is called Got to Be a Hero. It's actually the start of a book series that he's doing that he's calling the Accidental Heroes series. These are all young adult sci-fi fantasy kind of books. I'm not going to say they're like Twilight because I'm sure Paul would cringe if I said that, but I guess it's that sort of genre. But I urge you folks, go out there, and Paul is thanking us for doing the podcast. The way you can thank Paul for thanking us is to check out Got to Be a Hero on Amazon. It's available in Kindle. It's also available on paperback. Go out and support a fellow Dookie. Paul, again, thanks very much for doing this for us. All right, it's time to move on to Baylor. That's who Duke has this weekend. And when Duke first signed this series, this game against Baylor, I'm sure Duke fans were absolutely terrified because for several years, Baylor was one of the top teams in college football in the Southwest Conference. Baylor was contending to be in the college football playoff a couple times over the past few years. And we figured, oh man, this is Duke stepping up with an opponent who very well may beat the pants off of us. And yet things haven't worked out that way. This year's Baylor team, and we're not going to get into a discussion of the scandal and all the other horrible things that have happened. They've got a new coach and they've had a lot of problems. They had a lot of players leave the program. This year's Baylor team is terrible. Their opening week, they played Liberty and they lost 48-45. I'm sorry, that's to Liberty, a 1AA opponent. Then last week they lost 17-10 to Texas. To Texas San Antonio, that is, not regular Texas, UT San Antonio. They were a 12.5-point favorite over UT San Antonio. They lost. They were a 33-point favorite over Liberty, and they lost. Duke comes into this game against Baylor as a 14-point favorite. And just for some perspective, the last time Duke was favored by more than 10 points over a BCS opponent, over a major conference opponent, was 2014. We played Wake and we were a 19-point favorite over Wake in 2014. So this is the biggest line against a BCS opponent since 19-point line over Wake in 2014. And that 2014 Duke team won 9 games. So Baylor coming in, this is a team in absolute disarray, and Duke couldn't be sailing any higher. Donald, lead it off for me. Tell me a little bit more about the Baylor Bears.
So you alluded to a couple of things I was going to talk about. The fact that, one, they are terrible. I don't know. It's hard to explain why. You alluded to a lot of it with the off season, the off field issues that they've had as a program and as a school. But it does not explain why you're losing to Liberty and UT San Antonio. Those are 2 teams that they should be beating. And like you said, when we signed this deal to play them a home and home, way back, I guess it was 4 or 5 years ago, everyone was like, I really hope that Duke is really good at this point because Baylor is going to be spectacular. And we are pretty good, but I didn't think that it was going to be a 14.5 point spread. The one thing that Baylor does that has been lacking lately is their conversion on third downs. And I don't know if it's because they've played down to their opponent or they have played lazy. I haven't watched a lot of them, but so far they had 4 of 12 for third downs against Liberty. They were 2 of 12 for third downs against UT San Antonio. That is a problem because if you're not getting third down conversions, then your offense is leaving the field. And for good thing for Duke fans, our offense will be entering the field. So if our defense plays really well, like they did Saturday against Northwestern, Baylor's going to have a hard time getting any points or generating any momentum or any offense. One thing that's also hurting them is that they may not be with their starting quarterback. Anu Solomon is announced today, I guess, by the team that he's in a concussion protocol after taking a hit last Saturday, which is really bad for them because not only is he their starting quarterback, he's also one of their best rushers. Now, the lining in this is that Zach Smith, their backup, is a guy who has experience. He started a few games towards the end of last year, so he's familiar with the offense. He's not a guy that's played one down in college. He's a guy that has some experience. But when your leader's out, and you're down 0-2, you really have to dig deep with a backup to try and do a lot. So the 3 things that I will say that we need to do to win this game and to, hopefully win it pretty handily. 1, limit turnovers. Don't give them an opportunity to be in the game. This is a game that we should win. And it's funny saying this against a team called Baylor that Duke should be winning this game, but we should be. If we play well, we limit our turnovers, we should be winning this game. 2, get 3 and outs to frustrate their offense. Their offense has not been moving the ball very well, and their defense has been playing very, very poorly. Obviously, when you're giving up 46 points to Liberty or 43 points to Liberty, that is not a good outing. So getting 3 and outs will frustrate their offense and keep their defense on the field, keep them tired. That's when we can capitalize. And 3, on offense, be patient and efficient. What we did on Saturday against Northwestern is exactly how we should be playing against Baylor and against every team. Very efficient, very patient, great play calling, great execution. If we do all these things, we are going to put points on the board. And again, that momentum that I keep talking about, Baylor is a team that is on the down swing. They have their backs to the wall, and in their minds, this is probably a must-win game for them because after this, they're going to be starting to enter Big 10 or Big 12 play. And when you're playing against Oklahoma and TCU and some of these teams that they got to play, they don't want to enter that part of the conference schedule having lost their first 3 games to teams that on paper they should probably be beating. So if we limit turnovers, get 3 and outs on defense and on offense, be patient and efficient, that's what's going to win this ball game.
Sam, you got anything on Baylor? Donald, that was an excellent preview.
Yeah, I think that the thing I want to see carry over from Northwestern to Baylor the most, and Donald touched on it, but just to emphasize, the way that the Duke defense wasn't, I think a lot of fans and a lot of coaches talk about having the defense be aggressive and be attacking. I didn't think Duke needed to do that so much against Northwestern, and with a new quarterback coming in, I don't think they're going to need to do that against Baylor. I think it's about, meeting their assignments and playing playing their positions as well as they can. They don't have to. The defense doesn't have to be running all over the field and creating havoc. I think that they're good enough to just play straight up against Baylor and stop them at whatever they're trying to do. So I want to see the defense keep doing that. I want to see guys like the linebackers making those stops at the line of scrimmage, making good plays and making smart plays, because I think that with all that's going on at Baylor, straight up, Duke should just be able to beat them, which is not something we get to say very often. And which kind of leads me to sort of my next question that I wanted to pose to you two before we get away from football, if you don't mind. We've talked, so since we've been doing this show, Duke has kind of been in the sort of peak era of football. I think we started kind of after the Chick-fil-A Bowl season, but we've seen every year that we've been talking about Duke football on this show, at least, Duke's had a winning record. They've gone to a bowl game until last year. And generally things have been pretty good for this program. We've also made reference to the fact that it was only about 10 years ago that Duke was the king laughingstock of Division I football, so much so that that they actually won a lawsuit on the grounds of being the very worst program in Division I football when they had a canceled series against Louisville. And admittedly, I came to Duke in 2007 as a freshman. And prior to that, I just wasn't much of a college football fan. I grew up in Maryland. It's not exactly college football country. And so I don't really have the kind of the long time Duke football scars that you guys might have just from being a little older and for being Duke fans for longer. So my question to you, and I had asked for the audience, I had asked them this earlier, so they had a little bit of time to think about it. How long does the current level of success need to continue for Duke? Winning between 4 and like 8 or 9 games a year. How long does that need to continue before we stop pointing out how bad Duke was for so long?
I think it's going to take a lot longer than a few years. And the reason why I say that is, you were talking about the level of success that you've had since you matriculated to Duke. When I got to Duke, I did not see a football victory until the first game of my junior season. And that is something that weighs on you. Like every single time it also means that I don't take this success, this recent wave of success for granted because, growing up, I grew up a Michigan fan. So I grew up in a team that's winning 9, 10, 11 games a year, competing for national championships. Coming to Duke, it was a very stark reality when, you went through the first 2 years of your college career and not seeing a game where the points on the board was more than the opponent. And, even with some of these games, like over the years, we had a couple of seasons where we went over after I left. But now I feel like you have to get to a point where the people who remember the bad times are fewer than the people who remember it being just, everything great. So that's going to take a while. I think it's going to take, it's not going to take 5 years. It may take 10 before people say, hey, you know what? Duke is just a good team. It's a good program. But we're starting to see those pieces now. When you talk about, when you see on TV, they talk about coaching. Coach Cutcliffe is always coming up in coaching. And, you see more of our players in the NFL. That is another sign of a good program where people are taking, giving us respect. We're earning that respect right now. We have to keep it. And as we keep that, that's what's going to build momentum. The improvements to the program, the improvements to the stadium, the game day experience, all of that is going to add up down the line. It's not going to take 5 years. It's going to take a lot longer than that. But maybe 10 years from now, we're looking back and you have again, you may have a whole class of students that say, hey, I went all 4 years and didn't see us win, fewer than 6 games. Last year was kind of the end of a 4-year run. Now we're starting the next run. And I think when that happens, when you get more of that, level going and you see all these pieces being put together and paying off, that's when you're going to start seeing that. But I don't think it's going to be anytime soon, which is why I'm never going to take this portion for granted because I remember the bad times. I remember the offers, and I think a lot of other fans do too. So I think that is why we're going to keep being surprised and being, quite shocked at things like 14.5 point underdog or 14.5 point favorite Duke on SportsCenter. So I think that's my take on it. Jason, what's yours?
Well, so one thing I think about is, Duke wasn't terrible for that long.
Mm-hmm.
It was really a 8-year period from 2000 to 2007, the Carl Franks and Ted Roof eras.
Airborne.
where we never won more than 2 games, except once. There was one season, the year Carl Franks got fired and Ted Roof got hired, we won I think 5 games. But the rest of that era from 2000 to 2007, we never won more than 2 games, and the 2 games we won were almost always against lower class opponents, division 1 AA or whatever you want to call them, opponents who really, of course, Duke has no business ever losing to those kind of teams. So it was an 8-year period. Before that, we'd had good seasons, and we pretty consistently won at least 3 or 4 games. And if you go back to the years that I was at Duke when Steve Spurrier was our head coach, and we were incredibly fun to watch because we would put up 40 plus points. Now we would usually give up 50, but we put up 50, and it was a lot of fun. And we had a couple of years in there where we were really good. And then Fred Goldsmith came along, and we had some good years there as well. Where we made bowl games and such. So how long? Well, I think Donald sort of touched on it. It's when that 2000 to 2007 era becomes so fuzzy, so far in the past. You go, wait, that was a long time ago, and that doesn't represent the program at all anymore. And to me, one sign of that is sort of when you're talking about recruiting. Guys who Duke is currently recruiting for 2018, if you think about it, they would have been roughly, like 7 years old or so, 7, 8 years old when Duke emerged from the Carl Franks and Ted Roof era and began to become relevant again. So if there's someone who was really into football when they were first really into it, maybe when they're 8, 9, 10 years old, Duke is still sort of a laughing stock at that point, because people are remembering the 2000, 2007. So for me, it's probably another 3 or 4 years for Duke to get to the point where when we recruit kids, they have no memory whatsoever of Duke being a laughing stock of a program, of Duke being, arguably the worst program in all of Division I, or of all the, BCS conference, all the major conference teams. So I'd say give us about 3 more years or so to completely put it in the past. Sam, you asked the question. What do you think? When do we get to the point where we stop pointing out how incompetent we once were?
I think that I like your measure of recruiting. I think another measure, and this would be personal to each of us, would be, when's the last time you had a conversation with somebody about Duke football and heard the response, Duke has a football team?
Right.
Absolutely. Because I don't think it's happened to me like in the last 2 years, maybe probably something along those lines. And I would say that I would need to get to a point where it hasn't happened for, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years before I'm like, okay, we've rid ourselves of that. Because like I said, I wasn't much of a college football fan growing up. I probably didn't realize Duke had a football team like until I was in high school, and I was a Duke basketball fan, and like I watched SportsCenter every day as a kid. So that's saying so. And now obviously I love Duke football. That's it's one of my very favorite teams and biggest passions. But I think it's probably at the point where it's been a few years since you hear someone say, "Oh, does Duke even have a football team?" Because I don't think there are many programs in high level Division I that line gets uttered about.
And I think I was going to say the respect level of that. Like, I get that question a lot still because, especially from Miami people where they say, you're really rooting for Duke football over Miami football? Why? And now it's not a question that really is met with, I mean, I still get it a little bit, but when the answer comes out, they're like, oh, well, Duke is pretty good. They've been, kicking our ass lately. Like, that sort of thing. When their team gets beat by us, that's when the respect level comes in. Another thing that I think is something that Jason talked about a little bit, about how the kids that are on college now were basically grew up as like babies throughout this little dead period that we that we'll call the Franks Ruth era. And they were kind of babies, so they don't really remember it. But I think what I think is going to start happening is you're going to have guys for example, you're going to have guys in Washington, D.C. who see Jamison Crowder on TV balling out and saying, oh, that's cool. He went to Duke. Oh, that's cool. If he's going to ball out in the NFL at Duke, then Duke is an option. Guys in Cincinnati see Vinny Ray as their defensive captain, has been a defensive captain for years now. Are they looking up to these guys in the NFL? And when we get more of these guys in NFL playing, Jeremy Cash is now one of those guys that people say, oh, Jeremy Cash, where is he nowadays? Because that dude was a great player. And when you hear those lines and they say, you're watching Sunday Night Football or Monday Night Football and you hear Vinny Ray, Duke, everyone waits to hear these guys say their names and say what school they represent. And when you see more of these guys starting to represent Duke University, that respect level keeps going up and up and up. And that's why more of these recruits are wanting to come to Duke. That's why we're getting better recruits. And that's why Coach Cutcliffe is revered as having one of the better programs in college football, despite whatever record we may have. That sort of respect level, that is what is going to be needed as we continue forward to build this momentum and build this program.
One thing that I'll add to all of this, I really think this season is tremendously important for Duke football. We had the 4-year run of making bowl games, and look, we won 10 games in 2013. We won 9 games in 2014. We went to the Chick-fil-A and the Sun Bowl. Those are big time bowls that get lots of national attention. We were 500 or better in the conference 3 years in a row. Last year was a step back. I mean, it wasn't disastrous by any stretch of the imagination. We were very competitive in the ACC, even though we only went 1-7. We had a lot of hard luck losses and games that, just didn't quite go our way. We had the victory over Notre Dame early in the year. That was a, real put you on the map kind of win and hugely important for the program. But we only won 4 games. I think this year, I really, really hope, I really want us to get back to a bowl game, to get back to somewhere close to or above 500 in the ACC, to show that this little blip we had in there wasn't just a little blip. It was what the David Cutcliffe Duke Blue Devils are going to be on a consistent basis. And that the blip was last year, was 2016, when we were only 4-8. So that's why I think our 2-0 start, beating Northwestern's a big deal. Beating Baylor will be a big deal. And then UNC right after it. I'm hoping, I really want us to have a big year this year, and get to 6, 7, 8 wins or more, to really show that Duke football continues to be a program of relevance.
And one final thing that I'll note is, we were talking about, Baylor this weekend being an important game in the psyche. One of the stats that I heard on SportsCenter, and this is on SportsCenter, I don't know why they were talking about it on SportsCenter. Maybe it was because they were talking about how Baylor is being terrible. But they said that if Duke wins on Saturday, they will have beaten 2 Power 5 non-conference teams for the first time since 1989. So that means,
wow.
And so here's the thing. You hear that stat. You hear the stat that we had a couple weeks ago when we beat NC Central, where we scored 60 points, the most points we'd scored since 1949. These droughts are being toppled. That's what we want to see. Because next time we score 61 points, they'll say, hey, that's the first time we've scored 60 points since 2017. You don't want to hear these 1949s, 19 whatevers. You want to hear, this is the first time they've done that in 5 games. This is the first time they've done that since opening week last season. That's what's going to help reverse the psyche of not us, but of everyone else who's sitting there saying, who is Duke football? And, like even when Coach Cutcliffe back in 2013 saying, you're damn right we play football, that's not going to be something that's said by Duke anymore. It's going to be something that's said by the rest of the country.
I love it. That's great. That's 100% accurate and dead on target. Okay, guys, I got a question for you as we're about to wrap up. We spent a lot of time talking about football here. Hey, Sam, what's the name of this podcast?
Duke Basketball Report.
So I think maybe we should talk about basketball just for a brief moment. And the basketball news of the week that we have to discuss here during the middle of football season is the news that the NCAA has cleared Marvin Bagley III to play basketball this season for the Duke Blue Devils. It may seem silly to even talk about the fact that, they've cleared this player, because I can't recall. There's never been a guy, to my knowledge, that I can remember who came to Duke where there was a real question as to whether or not they would be cleared to play. But there were some questions with Bagley because he had to reclassify, and as a result, he had to accelerate his high school learning, his high school degree and the such. Look, he only arrived on campus a very short time ago because of that. And so there were some questions as to whether he might get cleared by the NCAA and be immediately eligible to play for Duke. There's now no question about that anymore. It was announced just a few days ago that Bagley was cleared. Sam, I'll go to you first. Any surprise here, or any comment at all about this stud recruit being cleared to play for the Blue Devils?
I think that there is probably justifiably so some chatter about, how Duke is kind of turning into Kentucky when it comes to recruiting and all the one and done guys and how do they get away with everything and nobody else does. And, people can speculate on that sort of thing. And as we've said before, we don't really have like deep insight into how the program operates. It doesn't surprise me that Bagley got eligible. I don't think that Coach K is going to be recruiting guys like in the Brandon Jennings situations where you're not sure if they're going to make it. I mean, it seems like from reading about it that they've been on this track for a few months. They've had a plan in place, and even though the NCAA may not have formally been looking at this until a couple weeks ago, I wouldn't be surprised if Duke had been communicating with them, with the appropriate people at the clearinghouse and with the Duke compliance office and all that to kind of, get the situation going. So I'm not surprised that he's eligible. I'm very excited about it. It's going to be really cool to see him playing with, with guys like Allen and Duval and Marquise Bolden. And on that subject, I would shed a tear for Marquise Bolden because if the rumors were true that he was thinking of transferring and kind of waffled and then ultimately ended up deciding to stay, man, what a bummer if this is ultimately the thing that ends him up on the bench. And I don't think we know yet exactly what the starting lineup's going to look like. And I think Bagley's probably of the three major bigs of him and Bolden and Wendell Carter. I think that Bagley's the only one that definitely starts. And you could talk me into Bolden or Carter being the other big that starts for Duke this year.
Donald, you got anything on this?
I agree with everything Sam just said. It's great for Duke basketball. It's great for Marvin Bagley. And I like the fact it was done early. We see a lot of these happen every year. Most notably, I think it was Enes Kanter who, they literally the week before the season started back when he was supposed to be a freshman, they said, nope, not eligible. So I like that. I agree with Sam where I think that they probably had all their ducks in a row so that when he committed, the process began and it was very smooth. And they had all the paperwork and everything needed to get him through early and not draw it out where, Coach K and the coaching staff has to make plans about, do we prepare for him? Do we prepare without him? Now he can fully integrate with the team. It seems like, from the videos on Duke Blue Planet that he's doing that very, very well already. And this is just one check mark. Now we have a full team. Now our team's set. And now we get to wait with anticipation and see what they can do.
So Sam had started to say there's probably going to be a little bit of grumbling about Duke becoming a one and done factory, so to speak. I thought he was going to say what I'm going to bring up, which is there's probably, as a result of the Marvin Bagley thing, there's probably more than a little bit of grumbling from other schools, other fans around the country that Duke gets away with everything. That's what they're going to say.
Oh yeah, that's it. And I've seen that and heard that and read that. So
yeah, I mean, the Duke look, we all know the Duke hate is real, and it's irrational. But I got to tell you, Donald brought up Enos Kanter. I want to if I was a Kansas fan, I'd be so angry right now that Duke did this, because just last year, Kansas had Chick Diallo, who is a stud recruit, big time player, and he couldn't get cleared by the NCAA eligibility folks. And he missed like the first 5 games of the year, and he never had the season they expected because he missed so much early season time waiting to get cleared, waiting to get eligible. And now this year, right now, Kansas thought they had a big time recruit, top 10 player, a kid named Mitchell Robinson, who went to Western Kentucky. He committed to Western Kentucky, and then he realized, wait a second, I'm such a big time recruit, I should go someplace else. And he went to Kansas, but unfortunately he'd taken a couple summer school classes at Western Kentucky. And so the NCAA said, no, you're not Kansas, you're a transfer. And so now he's gone back to Western Kentucky, and actually he may just skip college altogether and just go directly to the draft next year. But in any event, like if you're a Kansas fan, you've had 2 stud top 10 recruits who you thought were going to be game changers for you in the past 2 years. And the NCAA eligibility folks have said, no, they're not playing for you. And Kentucky had to do it with Enos Kanter. And Enos Kanter Enos Kanter's a very good NBA player. You cannot tell me that if you add Enos Kanter to that Kentucky team a few years ago, it doesn't give them a much, much better chance at winning a national title. So those fans, Kansas, Kentucky fans who look at Duke with jealousy, with anger and contempt all the time, they got to be looking at the Blue Devils right now and just going, God, you guys got away with it again. They and to some extent, I kind of love it. I think it's hysterical. Folks who say Duke gets all the calls and all this, we've talked about this in the podcast before. I love it. The notion that Duke gets all the calls. Yes, please. I want us to get all the calls. I'd love to think that it's actually 8-on-5 out there because we got the refs on our side. Let's make it 9-on-5 because we got the NCAA on our side. It's because we do things right. It's because we dot our I's, we cross our T's, and Duke makes sure before anything happens bad that nothing bad will happen. That goes to the guy at the top. That goes to Coach K. He has put together an incredible organization of people who know the rules. They know how to play right by the rules. They know how to make sure that things go the way they want it to. And I'm certain they knew that they were going to get Marvin Bagley III eligible well before he announced that he was reclassifying. And props to them. And I actually think you may start to see other schools start to catch on that maybe Duke has figured something out, that with the top recruits, with the guys who really are really eligible or good enough to reclassify, notion of ushering them through the reclassification process. And I firmly believe that Duke did that with Bagley. I think Duke spoke to him about reclassifying, talked to him about how it was going to happen, and Duke helped make that process happen smoothly. I think that you may start to see more and more guys reclassifying, moving up a class, and having the school help them with that process. Because here, and I think other schools will recognize that that's a way to make sure you get a guy. And the next name to talk about in that regard is R.J. Barrett, who is the number 1 recruit in the class of 2018. Duke is very hot after him. He was originally in the class of 2019. And he has also reclassified very recently. Now, it's not a late reclassification like Bagley. It's a very early reclassification. It's the start of his senior year. But you'll be hearing a lot more about R.J. Barrett, down the line. And, I think this is going to be a little bit of a trend of the very, very top players in the class trying to see if they can get to the NBA faster by getting to college faster and being done with high school faster. All right, so we're on recruiting, and I just mentioned a guy in the class of 2018. There's one other player in the class of 2018 who has something interesting going on with Duke. and I'm going to let Donald tell you all about that. Donald, give us a little recruiting update.
All right. Well, the number one player in the class, RJ Barrett, you were talking about him. He makes his official visit this weekend. But the number 2 player in the class is one that has been turning heads the last couple of days with a couple comments that he made, giving high praise to Duke. I love it. Zion Williamson, if you have watched YouTube in the last year and a half, maybe 2 years, you have heard of this guy because his dunks have dominated basketball, Twitter, basketball, internet for a long time. This dude is the real deal. And he said in comments to a magazine a couple days ago, he had high praise for Duke and how he had an in-home visit with Coach K, and Coach K was kind of talking about how he wanted to use him in an offensive role if he came to Duke next year. Now, he mentioned a couple of pieces that he was trying to get. First off, he kind of mentioned his plan of recruiting, and he mentioned the 2 guys in the class that have already committed, Cameron Reddish and Trey Jones. But what he also considered is that Coach K indicated he would have him in an offensive role similar to what LeBron James did in the 2012 Olympics. Now, if you guys watch the 2012 Olympics, you know that LeBron James was featured as the star. It was an offense geared around him to show the world that we had the best player in the world, and that was LeBron James. So, and it worked to perfection. We ended up winning the gold medal. This is the kind of offense that Zion Williamson is saying that Coach K would feature him in an offense next year. Now, what does this mean? Is Duke moving up his list? This is a guy that, honestly, most people didn't think had Duke anywhere near the top of his list, but he has 2 recruiting visits currently scheduled. That's it. He canceled an in-home visit with Kentucky last week because of Hurricane Irma. There's 2 on his schedule. One is UCLA, and the other is Duke for Countdown to Craziness next month. So I think this is piquing a lot of interest because, as you said, Jason, RJ Barrett, number 1 player in the class. Zion Williamson, number 2 player in the class. Cameron Reddish, number 3 player in the class. Are all these guys going to be at Durham next year? This is what's really interesting and kind of amazing, that the top 3 players in a class could all be going to the same school. And I think is really going to make for an interesting couple of months of recruiting.
Especially given that it's not like Duke's got, 1 or 2 of these very top guys and that the other guys are like waiting around for the spring to see who commits or who goes or whatever. It sounds like with these these visits are all happening either before the season starts or like in the preseason, and before the fall signing period. So it's reasonable to say that Duke's going to get, a number of these very top guys even before the season starts, even in that early period, like they did a couple of years ago with Jaleel Okafor and Tyus Jones, who were like, I think they were the last 2 guys to commit. Like Grayson Allen and Justice Winslow had already committed or were committing around the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Allen was way earlier, but getting those guys that were so talented and so early in the year where Duke fans and the Duke staff could look forward to them all year, and they were pretty much done recruiting in November.
Well, and it's not just the top 3 guys in the class that were that look like they're coming to Duke. A lot of people think that look like they're could be coming to Duke. We already have Trey Jones, who's number 6 in the class, and we're very, very high on the list, and most people think we're the favorite for the number 9 player in the class, Darius Garland. It could be a absurd, ridiculous recruiting haul for Duke in the class of 2018. You're talking about 5 of the top 10 players in the class. It's almost unfathomable. And yet this is the kind of recruiting role that Duke is on right now, that we have been on for the past couple of years. And it just continues to happen. It's really impressive. And I spoke a moment ago. I think it's the attention to detail by the staff. They really know how to break this stuff down. They know which recruits they want. They zero in and they get on those guys with laser-like focus, and those guys understand exactly what their role will be at Duke. And Donald, I love that you pointed out that quote that Zion Williamson had, where Coach K had described to him how he would use Zion if Zion comes to Duke, and how Coach K said, hey, look, Cameron Reddish and Trey Jones, they were part of my plan, and you are another piece of that plan. And all these dominoes are happening as I saw them happening. This is the way I wanted it to happen, and here's how I'm going to use you, and here's what we're going to do with you. I mean, when you're talking about the greatest coach of all time giving you that kind of a pitch, how do you say no? And the answer is most kids don't. They say yes. I'll take it.
And here's a question. I know we're going to wrap up very, very soon, but here's a question I'm thinking of as we're kind of going through this. So in the NBA, we had a era where, you had one team, one superstar, maybe two superstars, but that's about it. Then we had the super team era, which is right now, where players are trying to get together with other great players to try and win a championship. And they're not, the team, one star is long gone. Most teams want to have 2, 3, even 4, 5, 6 stars in the case of Cleveland, Boston, and Golden State. With college, that's always been, maybe 1, maybe 2, but for the most part, most of the top 10, top 15 recruits don't want to go to the same school as these other guys because they kind of see them as competition. And even, in the case of like RJ Barrett and Cameron Reddish, they play the same position for the most part. They have different games, but I think they play, a similar style of basketball. Are we starting to see a point where now, we've had some package deals, but now if this happens, is this the start of an era where the top players are trying to play with each other and not against each other?
So, Donald, I would argue that has started already. And I think it started in college basketball in 2014, the class of 2014. That's when Jaleel Okafor and Tyus Jones were a package deal. They were absolutely very clear that they were going to play at the same school. And Jaleel was the number 1 player in the class. Tyus was top 5 or so in the class. And, it was a point guard and a center. And they said, we're playing together. And they came to do it together. They committed at the same time. I think the success of Duke's class that year, especially when you add in Justice Winslow, and Grayson Allen, but really, Winslow was the other superstar in that class that Duke landed. I think we've begun to see more and more of guys starting to want to play together. And become form a super team on their own. And I certainly think, last year when you had Tatum and Giles, now it didn't work out as well as Duke would have liked, but Jason Tatum and Harry Giles had talked about wanting to play together. And they committed very close to each other. It was only a couple weeks apart, in their commitment. Again, injuries robbed them of what they could have been, I think. But I think you're seeing this. You're going to see more and more of it. I think it's good for Duke because I think Duke is a very clear destination for these guys if they want to, put themselves together as a package and come dominate college basketball for a year. In fact, I think there's sort of a limited number of schools that a player like that would even consider. It's Duke, it's Kentucky, Kansas and Arizona, maybe UCLA. And those are the schools that are, competing for these top products and who are getting multiples of these top guys. All right, guys. So with that, we're gonna wrap it up. We are all done with this edition of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. We should have almost called it the Duke Football Report podcast because we've spent so much time on football. Duke has Baylor coming up this weekend, and then after that, we have UNC. And believe me, stay tuned to this channel. We will bring you a preview of the UNC game next week. But for now, for Donald and for Sam, I am Jason. This is the DBR podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back at you in a couple days. And Duke Band, take us home.